morning. Before I get to your thoughts on what should be the priorities of the government, I really want to get your perspective on what you're hearing about the government's posture towards signing the African Common Free Trade Area Agreement, which many expect could come into effect this month.
Yes, indeed. As you are aware, the intention of the free trade area is to create a continental market by removing custom requirements and restrictions across African borders. Now, when this issue came up, the Manufacturers Association realized that this is something that is going to affect its members very, very significantly, and felt there was a need for detailed consultation with those who will be affected. The government can only make policy. At the end of the day, the execution of that policy is left to the people who actually invest and operate in the economy. And so we insisted that there is need for extensive consultation to define and identify the pros and cons of this agreement and how it is going to affect our members in particular, and of course other actors in the economy, and what are the opportunities that will be open to them, and what are the risks that they have to face. And I think it's important that any major policy development that is going to take place and affect the economy to that extent does need to go through this consultation process, and that there should be specific decisions and agreement internally as to what are we going to do first to mitigate any challenges that operators will meet, and of course to improve their ability to access any opportunities. This is what we insisted on, and fortunately the government under President Muhammadu Buhari agreed that there was need for this, and I believe over the past 6 months or so there has been real consultation with key stakeholders. A report is not out yet of those consultations. A very high-level committee was set up, made up of senior government ministers as well as key actors in the economy. And we expect this report will now be submitted to the government. Now, once that report is submitted, I think our concern is largely met. Whatever decision is taken, we know the consequences, we know how it is going to affect our people, we know how it is going to affect our economy, and we would be better prepared to mitigate any risks that will arise.
Right. I'm sure many will be happy to hear that the posture of the Manufacturers Association is more welcoming to the thought of the Common Free Trade Area. But let's now focus on the economy this year. Many are saying the president has to get going. We need to see a lot more traction in terms of economic policy, especially for manufacturing. So what, in your view, should be the priorities of the government right now for manufacturing?
I believe the key priority has to remain on infrastructure. Power, transport infrastructure, telecommunications, other infrastructure services that impede or exceed the competitiveness of the sector. Our economy cannot grow so long as our manufacturing sector remains small, remains disintegrated, and so long as we cannot compete with other products coming up from outside the country. And particularly when we're talking about opening up the borders and creating a continent-wide free trade area, it is absolutely important that our capacity to compete, especially in terms of manufacturing, must be taken to the highest level possible. That is why we're concerned that the progress that has been made in the infrastructure sector must be sustained and indeed accelerated. We want to see a lot more work being done on the port sector. The current bottleneck in the Papa port must be removed as quickly as possible. I believe that the intention of government in terms of the new initiatives on the road sector is extremely valuable and worthwhile. We commend that, and we'd like to see that actually, if you like, taken to the next level. Obviously, there is also a lot of work that has to continue to be made in the power sector. We know that there are a lot of projects, both at all levels of the sector, the transmission, the generation, the transmission, and the distribution. Effort must be made to get the power sector right. Now, we understand this will take some time, but I think there are some quick wins that can be brought into the sector. Right. For instance, we've been discussing
Okay, let me ask you
Yes,
something that I think is very sensitive to business owners, and that is the issue of taxes. This year, I think many are expecting, because of the need to try and balance the budget to some extent, there could be some increases in taxes, perhaps even VAT. What's your reaction to the prospect of that?
Well, we have been actually in discussion with the FIRS, and first we believe that a lot of progress has been made. We have seen the tax revenues increase substantially. I believe that in 2018, we're talking about almost 5 trillion naira raised through taxes. But this has been achieved simply by doing the right thing, which is ensuring that anybody who actually ought to be paying taxes are paying their taxes. So widening the tax net is the first important step that needs to be taken. And I think this should be sustained. We have seen in recent weeks, actually, that actions that have been intended to improve the tax net have actually generated very, very significant outcomes. I think this should continue.
Okay, sorry to cut in, but because I'm so sorry, I am running out of time, but I really need to get this question in. But what will be your posture to an increase in taxes this year? Because many are suggesting that it's inevitable.
I believe it is premature. I think that if we continue to focus on widening the tax net, on ensuring that everybody who is liable to pay taxes are paying their taxes, we should continue to see massive increases. I believe that given the current state of the economy, particularly given the current growth rate in the manufacturing sector and the capacity utilization we are seeing, which is still below 60%, I think it is important not to increase costs to the manufacturing sector, particularly as we're talking about difficulties with the infrastructure. Manufacturers are having to expend a lot of resources providing their own infrastructure. I think it is premature to increase taxes. I think we should focus on widening the tax net and ensuring that all those who are eligible to pay taxes are paying their taxes.
And beyond just improving infrastructure in general, power and so forth, what's your view on what the government should be focusing on for SMEs? Because at the end of the day, SMEs are really the engine of growth.
This is absolutely true. And I believe that in this regard, the area that needs to be addressed immediately and first is actually what the government is already doing in terms of diversifying the economy, creating opportunities, especially in the agriculture and agribusiness sector, where a lot of SMEs are operating. Clearly also, the government through CBN has been making a lot of effort to reduce the cost burden of particular SMEs through the provision of financial services. I think this should be continued. I believe that SMEs are still finding it difficult to access finance, and even where they do, the costs are still rather high. So I think we must continue to make efforts to increase access to finance for SMEs and also to reduce the cost as much as possible.
I think
one other area, of course.
Yeah, go ahead. Yes. Go ahead. Please finish your
One other area, of course, with regards to SMEs is actually improving the value chain area, creating more connectivity between different sectors in order to widen and improve the value chain and reduce the reliance on import for all sorts of inputs that's going into manufacturing and industry.
All right. And the point you made about connections and value chains, I think is very important. And it leads me to this question about the broad economic policy of the government. If you get the sense that there is a connection in terms of how what they're doing in infrastructure is created to support manufacturing, is supposed to drive IT and so forth. Do you get the sense that what we need in the second term of President Buhari is simply to execute on a framework that has been created, or are you still concerned about the framework that has been created in the first term?
I think you're right. I think we need to execute those economic policies and initiatives that are already in place. We need to scale up our efforts in this regard. For instance, in the area we're talking about value chain development, there have been decisions or policy initiatives with regards to industrial parks. These are the quickest way to bring SMEs together to provide infrastructure services to them at a competitive rate and to be able to also expand the value chain network for each of our various processes. I believe also in this regard, there is need for the federal and state governments to work together very closely because by and large, a lot of the demands of the SMEs actually have to be met by state governments rather than federal government. But there is need for collaboration.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. The President of the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria.